Continuing with hooks, in this video, we will learn how to build a React form using function components and hooks. So let us dive into an exercise, and while doing it, we will appreciate the different aspects of how to use hooks and function components to build a React form. So create a form which takes the name and age of a person as input. So this form would be created as a class component, and then we want to implement the same component as a function component using hooks. So let us go ahead and do it. So here we have a very simple application. There is a main component which has these two routes, persons/add to add a person and /persons to display all the persons. In its state, it's maintaining this array persons, and it has this handle submit, which pushes the details of the new person into this array. We have a simple nav bar to display the links to /persons and /persons/add. We have persons, which just displays that array of persons. And then we have this add person, which is a simple form which has these two fields, name and age, and on clicking it, we just submit it back into the main component. Let's look at the main component. The main component is passing in the props this onSubmit function to the add person. So now what is our objective? We want to implement this form as a hook. So how should we do it? So we have created this file add_person_hook.jsx, and we will implement the same thing here. So let's start with our imports. What all do we need? We would need React, useState from React. Next, what do we do? Let's define our function add person. And now within this, let's define the code. So what would we need here? Here, like we defined a state, we will use state to create the name and the age. So let's do that. This will also get a props. So let's do that. So const name comma say set name is equal to use state. So we have initialized it. Similarly, let's initialize age. Next, what do we want to do? We would need to implement the components. So let's just get the render from here. Let's get the return part, and then we will make those suitable changes on it. So the form we have copied. So now in the form, what all changes do we need to make? We need the value. The value will be name. So this is fine. We need to handle the on change. So the on change that we have defined here, how can we do that? Here we can just simply say we get the event e goes to, in this case we are changing the name. This is handling the name, so we can just use the set name. And what will be set name here? So if we go and look at the handle change, what do we do? e.currentTarget.value. So the same thing we can do, e.currentTarget.value. So this would be our handle on change. Similarly, for the case of age, we get the event, and we can just use set age e.currentTarget.value. We could have also done it through a handle change, but this is for a simple form. This is much simpler. So now the rest are there. We get the value of name, we get its name, we get all these fields here. Next, what do we want to do? Let's take the handle submit from the previous one and implement it here. So function handle submit, and we will just call that handle submit here. So here, instead of on submit being this dot state dot person and props dot on submit, what should we? Let's construct a person, a JSON, name is name, and age is age. Why are we doing this here? Because we had constructed them separately. So now we have created it. So now we can just submit person. And will it be this dot props on submit? No, it will be just props on submit, and this will be props dot history. So we have done that, and let us just for testing maybe call it hooks. Let's put a hooks here. Once we have done it, let's look at what else do we need to do. We need to do an export. So let's do it. Export default add person. So this should be fine. Let's go to the main component, and in the main component, let us use add person hook, add person from add person hook. Let us now test it. So these are our persons. If we go to add person, it gives us this error, cannot on this line 36. So what is the error? This should not have been here. That's the error. Let's test it now. So we get that, and we get an enter person name hooks. Let's enter a person, say Tim, age 29, and submit. And you can see we have gotten the person. Similarly, let's enter another person, say Bob, 56, and we have that person. So we made those changes, and now we are using the add person hook. Next, what do we want? The details can also be edited. So here we have just used and created a new person. Let's also have functionality to edit it. So to edit it, what all changes will we need to do? In our route, we will need to add a route for edit. Let's do that. So it will be, let's say, call it index/edit, and this should be fine. So that's the change here. Second, in our handle submit, we will need to make that change. So if index is truthy, then what do we do? Persons1 plus index equal to person, else we push it. That's the change. So we update or push. So these are the two changes to main component. Let's go to our persons. In our persons, what will we need to do? We will need to show a button. So let's create a button. And in the button, we show the text edit. What will be on click here? This dot handle, let's call it, say, edit. Let's define our function handle edit. And it should take the index. So we are getting the index here. So handle edit is a function. It takes the index, and what does it do? This dot props dot history dot push, and what does it push? Slash persons index slash edit. So we push that, so that is fine. Now we need to handle it in our add person. What would be the changes in the add person? So depending upon whether it is edit or a new thing, if it is edit, what all are we getting from the main component? So in the case of edit, we will also need the details of the persons. So persons is equal to persons. So this would be our edit. Let's go back to our add person. So now in the add person, let's say define a function update data. And what does it do? Depending upon what it is getting as props, it will update it. So let's get the two props. Let index equal to this dot props dot match dot params, and let persons equal to this dot props. These are the two props. Now what do we need to do? We will need to check whether we are getting index. So if index is truthy, that means, and let's say here person is equal to, then what will be person? It will be persons from the index. Otherwise, what will it be? It will be an empty JSON. So what will this be? This would be my person. And we can just say this dot set state person is person. So now where should we call this update data? This update data we will call in our component didMount. This dot update data. And we will also call it in our component didUpdate. Why will we call it there? If we go back and look at the interface, we will get our edit functionality there. And once we get our edit functionality, if we click on add person, the person will change. So we will need it at both places. So let's do that. Component didUpdate previous props, comma previous state. And what does it do? If previous props not equal to this dot props, then we will just do this dot update data. So that's the change we have made. So now person would get suitably updated here. In our handle submit, what we will need to send is also the index. So let's get the index here and also send the index. So once we have done it, let's get the index also in the render so that we can show it in submit. So if index is truthy, it is update, else it is submit. So these are our changes. In our main component, let's first run it from the main add person and let's see. So there seems to be some issue here. Let's just inspect the console. At persons, we are getting this error. Let's go back to persons. So this is the error. This should have been the way we called it was wrong. Let's now test it. So all persons. Now if I click on edit Jack, we get that. Let's call it, say, maybe Jackson. And this has become Jackson. If I click on add a new person, Tim 44, that works fine. And I'm on edit, and now if I click on add person, it becomes that. So this part is now working fine. What is the change we need to do? Now we need to implement the changes we made in add person hook. So how would we do that? So the first thing we need to do is, because we are using the component lifecycle, we need to also get useEffect. we will need to get the values from the props. So let's go to add person and maybe get these three things and say put them here. So now we have gotten both the props. In index persons we have it, and in person we would have either the value or this JSON. Let's now use useEffect. And what do we do here? We can just set name. What will be set name? Set name will now be person.name, and set age will be person.age. So notice we have not used the useEffect or the set name within a condition. So we have avoided that. So this should be fine. Now once we have done that, what is the other thing we need to do? In our submit, we should be able to send the index. So we will get the index here also. And index will not have, props will not have this. So let me delete that. So we have sent that. And here again, we would need index to make that change on the button. So let's do that. Ideally speaking, we have index available inside the functions everywhere. So we don't need it, because once we have defined index, they will be available. So I can just say here in this case, index is truthy, then update, else it's submit. So these changes should work. And note, we are always doing enter person name hooks and enter age of person. Let's call it also hooks here. Let's go to the main component, and instead of using add person, let's use add person hook. Let's test it now. So this is our all persons. This is add a person. Let's add a person. So I cannot add it. Why can't I add it? Let's figure that out. So the reason why this is not working, this should have worked, is that we used our useEffect. Now every time we are making a change, it will call the componentDidUpdate. When do we want this to get fired? We want this to get fired when the index changes. That's what we want. Let's make that change. Let's refresh it. Now if I try and type Tim44, I can do that. So now we have these three persons. Let's now click on edit. So we get that. Is this working? Yes, this is working fine. Let me edit it. Now if I click on add a person and try and add it, I can do that. Let's go ahead and edit. And this is working fine. So here the same form has been created as a function component using hooks. And just keep in mind the changes we have made here and how they will run. Let's look at the next exercise. To the form are added the fields city dropdown, designation radio, and text known checkbox. Implement the same component as a function component using hooks. So different kinds of inputs, dropdown, radio, and checkbox have been added to the form, and we need to implement the same as a function component using hooks. And this is the add person, which is with the dropdown for city. The designation is a radio and text is a checkbox. So if we run the app, so these are our persons. So that's the display person doing. It is displaying all those fields. If I add a person, you get this kind of a form. So you have a city, which is a drop down. You have a designation, which is a radio. And then you have all the technologies, which is checkbox. You can go to all persons and edit it, the same functionality that we were doing. So if we go back to the code, what are the changes we have done? So in the main component, the two persons that we have defined, we have added the values of city, designation, and text known. Note, because text known is a checkbox, so it's an array. So for Jack and Anna, we have done that. The other thing we have done is that in our persons, we have displayed the city, the designation, and the text known using a join on the array. And then there is the add person. So in the add person, we have these three arrays, text, cities, and designations for the values to show there. Then what are the other changes we have done? The other change that we have done here is that in our handle change, we have provided the handler for the checkbox. So instead of the earlier handle change, we are handling the checkbox using the update CPs. So if you have not seen this approach earlier, we have done it with our forms using class components. So the link of that lesson would be in the description. You can go and check it. This is using exactly the same approach. So either we update the field, or for the checkboxes, if the type is a checkbox, we create the array and update it. Then in our render, we are just showing those components. So we are showing the city, we are showing the designation as a radio, and we are showing the technologies as a checkbox. So this is the add person. So now what do we need to do? In our add person hook, we now need to use them. So let us start by adding them one by one. So maybe let's start with adding the drop down for cities. So let me copy the details of the cities. So let cities is equal to, so this is our cities, and let's define it also, city comma set city is equal to use state. So we have initialized the city. So exactly the same approach that we used for name and age. And what do we need to do now? In our person, now we also have city is an empty string. Where else do we need it? In our here, when we send it, city will become city. So these are the changes so far. In our use effect, again, we will need to set city person dot city. So these are our changes here. Next, we need to render it. So let's just go to our add person and copy the render for it. So this is the render for our city. Now what all do we need for it? We need city, which we have. Now on change, we will change, and city should be fine. So now what will be on change? On change would be like we have done for the name and the age. The same way, we can just say E goes to set city E dot current target dot value. So we can just update the value. So this should work for our city, this set of changes. Let's go ahead and test it. So to test it, let's use add person hook. If I click on add a person, we can see we have gotten the drop down. Let's create a person, say Tim, age 32. Cannot read property of join. So that was our error here, because we have, so this is showing the error because text known is not defined in this case. Another approach we could use is that in our add person hook, let us always put in the other two. What are the other two? So that we can just test it. They are designation and text known. So let's just initialize both of them here. and here again let's make it an empty string so that these values are initialized in our add person hook. So whether it's when we are doing our submit or when we are doing it, we'll update those values later. So let's add a person. We said Tim, 32, city is say Paris, and now we can get that. Similarly, if we edit Anna, we can update the city to London. So this part is working fine. Let's now do the other two parts, the designation and the text. So let's move to the designation. So what's that? This is the name of the field, designation. So let's say const designation comma set designation is equal to use state. We need the list of designations, so the array, so let's get that. Let designations equal to this. So here this is perfectly fine. In useEffect, let's update set designation person dot designation, and when we are submitting it, this will become designation. So this is the change we have made. Now we need to render it. So let's just go and pick up the render. So this is our render for designation. Let's pick it. So designations dot map, and again what will be on change here? So like we did earlier, E goes to set designation E dot current target dot value. So that will be the value of our designation, the radio button that we have clicked. So that we have now set our designation, what's the next thing? Let's just go ahead and test our designation. So add a person, let's just refresh it, add a person, say Tim, 32, Paris, let's say designation is senior developer. So we get that, and if we edit one of them, say Anna becomes a developer, this is working fine, becomes a team lead, Jack, and this is also working fine. Next, what do we need to do? The third thing, which is text known. So let's get those details. So same process we are following. We had initialized it here, perfect. Let's do this here, set. We did not define that. Let's define it here, const text known comma set text known is equal to use state, and what do we initialize it with? An empty array. So set text known person dot text known. So that's the change here. Similarly here it will become text known. So this is the change. Now what do we need to do? Let's copy the render from add person. So we have put in the render. And now what do we need to do? What will be the on change in this case? So let's go back and look at our add person. In this case, for the type text known, we have used a special case because it's an array. So we call this function update CPs. So we will need to handle this exactly the same way. So we will create an array. This is an array, and in the array we will insert this value. So that is what we need to do. So let me just copy this function update CBs and then I'll explain it. And let's put it as function update CBs. So what does it do? It takes the initial array, the values that are there, the value that was checked, and its value. So depending upon whether it was checked or what was done, we do that. So if checked, we push it in, otherwise we delete it. And before that, let's just make a copy. Let input array1 equal to input array. So we can use this so that we get a new array as the output. So once we get this, we need to call this function. So what can we do here? If we look at add person, how did we do it? We called it dot text known is this dot update CVs, the earlier value, the input dot checked, and the input dot value. So how can we call it here in this case? We can say event E goes to, and we can call update CBs. And in some sense, if we just set text known, we could have done this. We could have passed it the event, or we could have passed it all the values. So let's just pass them now, all the values. What are the values here? So the earlier value is this array text known. That's the current array. E dot current target dot checked and E dot current target dot value. These are the three things we need to pass to it. Let's just look back again. These are the three things we are passing. Input is E dot current target. So we passed it the current array, the checked, and the value. So we have just passed it and we set it here. So exactly the same approach. Let's test it. So if we click on add a person, name 32, city is Paris, say senior developer, and let's say he knows React, JavaScript, and Node.js. And that is exactly we get. If we edit it, this is what we get. Suppose he also knows jQuery, which is what we get. And this is working perfectly fine. So if we just go back and recap the code, what did we do? Exactly the same approach we used in add person. In the case of add person, what had we done in the handle change? If the input dot name is, if the input dot type is checkbox. So for the checkbox, what did we do? We took the array and handled it separately, because in the array either we'll remove the value if the checkbox has been unchecked, or we will push the value if the checkbox is checked. So that is exactly this thing we did. Now instead of creating a function like that, we have just created this update CBs, which is exactly the same function. The only difference we have done here is that we have made a copy of the array. Why have we made a copy of the array? Because here we made a copy of the state. So this array got created again. Here we did not make a copy, so which is why we have made a copy. And in that we have done exactly the same thing. And then we have used our set text known to set this new array. So the same approach. So it's exactly set designation like we do set text known, except that in this case we had to create this function. Next, what do we need to do? The class component defined a function handle change to handle the changes being made to the form fields. Instead of updating the form fields in the form, use the same approach. Starting with the code of the class component, make suitable changes so that it becomes a function component. So here we have created an empty function component, and what we want to do is we want to use the approach that we have used in add person, which was a class component, and we want to base our code exactly on this structure. So how would we do that? So let's start making those changes. So note there are 3 differences. First, instead of using independent fields in the state, we used a person object. So we will use that. Second, we created this function check for edit. We will use that. And third, we will use the handle change. So these are the 3 changes largely that we will make. So let's start with this code and let's create it. So the first thing, let me just copy the 4 state pieces. So let person equal to this, let x equal to this. So they were in the state, we are now creating variables for them, so which is why we need to convert it. Next, what do we need to do? We need to use our state, so we can say const person comma set person equal to use state, and we need to set this person. So let's just copy this and put that here. So this is what we have done, and I don't need this person here. So we have now created in our state, effectively we have created this person and we have created these fields. Next, what do we need to do? We have our componentDidMount and our checkEdit. So let's copy that code. So here we will use our useEffect. And what do we do in our useEffect? We will just call our check for edit. That is what we are doing here. And what was the variation we wanted? When the value of the index has changed. So let's define our index. So let me move the index from here to this point. And now I don't need this. Let's convert it into a function. It will not be this dot props, it will be props, and here again this will not be this dot props, it's props. So if person is equal to, let person is equal to index, and we set, instead of set state, we will just, what will we do here? We will just say set person 1. Let's call this person 1 because we have the person that we are using here, and this is what we have done. So we have updated the state in this case. So this is done. Next, what do we want to do? We want to define our handle change. Let's define our handle change. So function handle change, it takes the event, and this will be function update CPs. So note in this case we have the person. So here we can say instead of s1.person, let's make a copy of the let person 1 is equal to, we make a copy of the person and person 1. So that is the value we update. So instead of using s1.person, we have person 1 here, which is exactly the same JSON. And that's what we have done. And instead of set state, what we will use? We will say set person 1. So that is how we update our state. The rest will work exactly the same way. In this case, we made a copy, so we have not made a copy of the input array. Once we have done this, let's move to the next part of the code, which is the handled submit. So function handle submit is we don't need to get the index here, we are getting it above, and instead of this dot props, it is just props, and we can just send the person with the index. That's exactly what we can do. Next, what do we need to do? We need to do a render. So let's just copy it. And here it will become return we need to destructure our person. So let's do that. So instead of this dot state dot person, this is our person. We have this, we have the index, we don't need this, we don't need this return, and this is fine. So now what other changes we need to do here? So this is using the handle change. So instead of this dot handle change, it will just become handle change. So let's make that change everywhere. So this should be fine now. Now what do we need to do? I will just make another change here so that placeholder, let's say, is hooks new. Let's call it that so that we know this is the code being run. Let's test it now. So this is our code, hooks new. We see that. Let's create our person, say Tim, 32, Paris, say team lead, React. Now cannot read property CB is of undefined. So we have gotten an error here. Let's try and debug it. So what is the error? We have done this dot update CB, so there should have been no this there. Let's test it again. So remember this error when we are converting it, but this is just for conversion. So typically you have, as you understand this process, the earlier one and this, you will be able to write the code on your own. Let's go back and test it. So let me just refresh. So this is Tim, 32, Paris, say team lead, React, JavaScript, node.js. Submit, and we get the details for Tim. If I edit, say I add this works fine. And this is working absolutely fine. We can edit any one of them, we can add a new person, and this is working fine. So here what we do? We used exactly the same process, and if you follow it step by step, what will become clear is how from a class component we have converted it to a function component using useState and useEffect. So both the approaches should be very clear to you. In the first one, we just wrote that code on our own step by step. Here we used the same approach that we used in our add person, and this would become absolutely clear. So write both of them practice them and it should become clear.